So you explained what the sensory integration is. For simplicity, I would say now you also add the motor system for sensorimotor integration.
Sure. Yeah, but in the end, I cannot see perception completely isolated from, let's say, action or the motor system. So we perceive, and with that content of our perception, we try to do something. We act, or we do not act, or we inhibit, or we do some. We might at least something might be going on based on our content of the contents of our perception.
But so basically, you're saying we're not just perceiving for the sake of perceiving.
Exactly, I don't think so.
Yeah,
we perceive in order to act, but if we act, there will be a consequence for our perception. And so that's a kind of closed loop.
Yeah.
So perception drives action, action drives perception. Of course, where the sensory systems provide all kinds of information, some of which is more or less reliable. The same also up in the motor system. Some signals that I send to my muscles are more precise than other signals. Some movements are more clumsy than other movements. I can improve on some movements. That means that I try to make them a bit more reliable. If I keep on exercising the surface in tennis, I will get better because it will make this movement a bit more stereotyped, and it means it's a bit less noisy. And so you have that loop between the sensory system and the motor system. But one of the problems is that the motor system can respond quite quickly, and it can already make a change in the world without you knowing that there's a change in the world, because our perceptual system, our sensory systems, they are somewhat slow.
Yeah, you have a delay.
They have a delay. It takes 80 milliseconds before a visual cue is being processed, or maybe a bit shorter for an auditory cue, whereas the movement can already be over. And the idea is that the brain, that notion is referred to as the brain as a predictive machine or a prediction machine, that the brain uses the motor system in order to also make predictions about what the sensory systems are going to detect. And so there's two loops. There's the sensory, the motor sensory loop, but there's also a predicted sensory loop. And so now you have sensory predictions and you have new sensory information. And of course, that also needs to be integrated. And so we also refer to that process of sensory-motor integration. But the whole idea that the sensory and motor systems should not be studied or conceived in isolation, that is typically referred to as the problem of sensory-motor integration.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Specifically, if you perform a motor action and then you have a sensory predictor being triggered by this, you miss a big chunk of information if you were to study it in isolation.
Yes,
because this is quite important. Yeah. And so there's this one observation which I find quite interesting. Every time I go to a bar and I see the waiter coming, and they have something on their tray, of course, and then people at the table try to be nice, so they take something off the tray. They should not do that, huh? They should not do that. No. And I try to tell them why they should not do that. They just never believe me that So just to explain, the waiter knows the weight of the tray and is very good at balancing it out. But if you take something off the tray, the sensory system of that waiter kicks in with this delay, while you know very well what you're picking up and when the waiter does not. So the arm of the waiter goes up, which can lead to imbalances and very often to disaster.
Yes.
While if the waiter does it him or herself, they very well know the weight and exactly at which moment it will leave. That's the sensory predictor you talked about, which then leads to the movement being perfectly, it actually leads to no movement because it's completely compensated for.
This is very smooth acting. Huh?
Yes.
Well, it's the same reason that you can't tickle yourself. A very popular example. Why can't you tickle yourself? Because you can make, based on how you control your fingers, you can derive the sensory predictions, and the brain can tune them down.
Exactly.
Whereas you are going to tickle me, I can't make these predictions because I have no access to your motor system.
Yeah.
And so it feels very ticklish.
Yeah.
But same idea.
Exactly, same idea. Yeah. But I just find it so fascinating that whenever I bring this up and wherever I am, people just don't believe me. Because they feel as if everything is so perfect in our sensory processing and control, that they just don't believe me. And we end up with a tray and everyone trying this 20 times because they are very convinced they will get better at it. But I try to tell them, it's like, there's nothing you can do about this.
Well, you can. I think if you do it in a kind of stereotype manner, of course, you can learn a bit.
Sure.
Yeah. But it's indeed
which is then another sensory prediction, actually.
Of course.
Yeah.
But at a different level.
At a different level.
Yeah. But that is sensory motor integration.